So Season 2 of Diablo 4 is finally coming, with Druids already being in a decent place in terms of their power level. If anything though, the Druids' only major weakness is their slower leveling speed, and so in today's video we're going to be taking a look at some of the best ways that you can progress throughout the earlier stages of the game and enter into World Tiers 3 and 4, as well as examine some of the new changes and the new builds that are going to be becoming more viable with the season's new changes. So with that, let's take a quick look at some of the primary patch note changes that particularly affect Druids, starting with the changes with damage buckets, namely with Overpower, Critical Strike, and Critical Strike damage, and Vulnerable. But one thing I do want to highlight here is that Overpower has been greatly buffed, and so this would definitely directly benefit Pulverize Werebeast builds. So firstly, Overpower will now grant a damage multiplier to your skill damage as opposed to something based on just like a health number, and then it'll also scale better the more health as well as the more fortify you have, and so that's really powerful already. And not only that, but affixes with Overpower have been increased, Paragon glyphs and nodes have also been increased in terms of the damage percentages. Next, although there haven't been that many drastic changes to the Druid in terms of their class itself, as it's already in a decent spot, there have been some other buffs to Pulverize and Overpower, namely with Fortify now being based on maximum life, and then also with the Earth Sign Strength key passive now not only giving you multiplicative increased damage just straight up while you're healthy though, but also increasing your Overpower damage on top of that, also multiplicatively. Plus, with Vampiric powers, which are the new Season 2 mechanic, there's actually a new major power, so to speak, that also benefits Overpower, which is whenever you overpower an enemy, you spawn some like blood explosive drops that'll allow you to AoE enemies even better. And also on top of that, every 20 seconds you gain an additional guaranteed Overpower on your skill. So that's really good, as Overpower is typically something that you can't really spam, but this will allow you to do it a lot more frequently. And besides that, there's also another interesting effect that is actually based on your maximum health right here, called Hemomancy. And if you equip this, your attacks will actually deal an amount of your maximum life to nearby enemies as well, and also heal you. So this is some additional AoE, and if you're going to be stacking max life anyway to increase your Overpower damage, this should actually most likely be a good Vampiric power to use as well. And yet another massive change coming to the Pulverized Druid is a legendary aspect, or a new legendary aspect, which granted you would use to replace one of the older existing ones, but this does seem like a very powerful one, which is that whenever you hit 15 enemies, or after you hit 15 enemies with your Werebeast skills, which is very easy to do when you have like your shockwave that comes out from it with the other aspect, your next skill will be able to deal up to 50% multiplicative damage and also stun enemies for some CC, which is a huge damage buff as well. And if Season 1 was any indication, typically the new aspects that Blizzard is pushing will be featured in the season journey as well, because they again want players to try out some of these new builds, right? By releasing these new aspects, and not only that, but by putting them also in the season journey. So there's a very high chance, although we haven't gotten an official release of the season journey just yet and the rewards, there's a very high chance that the Raw Might aspect will be included in the season journey, making Pulverize a prime choice for progression and potentially even, well, definitely even endgame. And as for some of the new unique items, the Dolmen Stone, first of all, which is an amulet, allows your boulders to also rotate around your character whenever you have Hurricane active, which kind of feels like Diablo 2's Hammered In or Diablo 3's, but this remains to be seen how good it actually is, especially in the end game. So I'm not really going to cover a boulder build in this video, but perhaps more notably, the Banished Lord's Talisman here has the effect of whenever you spend, or after you spend 300 of your primary resource, your next core skill is also guaranteed to Overpower, giving you yet another Overpower chance. And the crit strike damage is also increased for that Overpower multiplicatively. It's hard to say, but that's also quite massive. Now for some other notable changes to different builds, starting with Lightning Storm, which is one of my favorite builds, and it's already a strong build, although it might not be the best bossing build, especially with the focus on farming bosses in Season 2. But anyhow, with each class, by the way, getting 2 new Paragon glyphs, the Druid actually got one called Electrocution, which is a direct buff to Lightning Storm if you take the Lightning Dancer aspect, which a lot of builds do. And the Lightning Dancer aspect previously didn't scale that well. It's great AoE, but its damage numbers were largely based on what was on the aspect itself. But with this new Paragon glyph, you can gain up to an additional 40% increased damage for every 5 willpower purchased within the range, which is a huge percentage, and just for 5 willpower each, right? And at max rank, of course. And not only that, but your lightning bolts, which is the passive lightning bolts that get called down, not from the lightning storm itself, but the additional lightning bolts that spawn from your passive effects, also get buffed from this. And this also increases the damage taken from both of these types of damage from casting your lightning storm. So that should be a very interesting and decent change, I would say. And that's not even all for Lightning Storm buffs, because if we take a look at Vampiric powers, at major powers more specifically, there's actually one called Bathe in Blood, which benefits channeling skills, where whenever you channel a skill, and of course with Lightning Storm, you'll be standing still while casting it, although there's still like the tapping strategy, but anyhow, whenever you're whenever you're channeling Lightning Storm, you actually drop a blood pool, which will further increase your damage by 40% and also give you 30% damage reduction, which is a huge increase to, again, a good build already. But how it does against bosses remains to be seen. But I'll go over a hybrid build that can probably do quite well indeed. Now, for a perhaps overlooked change, and that is that Nature's Fury, the key passive, also whenever it triggers a skill of the opposite type, which again, this passive is used by builds like Trampleslide and also even Lightning Storm builds, where you would spec into Landslide to allow your Lightning Storms to trigger a Landslide, and Landslide being a strong single target damage skill. With this new change where the triggered skills also count as both Earth and Storm skills, those skills can become more powerful because you'll be able to essentially benefit from, for example, if you specialize in a single element, those triggers will also benefit from that element no matter what. Or if you have, for example, legendary aspects or Paragon passives and whatnot that are on both sides, like if you have both types of elements, passes for both, those skills can actually benefit and double dip from both, allowing for example, if you use Lightning Storm and Landslide, the landslides to become even more powerful. And for just one more improvement and potential build to try that I'd like to point out, Rabies is also getting a buff, which is the skill that allows you to poison and spread poison to enemies, the spread speeds being greatly increased as well as the damage slightly. And also there just seems to be a lot of synergy with damage over time effects in this patch. They're definitely trying to push it. And if we especially look at the Vampiric powers again, there is indeed another Vampiric power called Flowing Veins that allows you to deal a whopping 60% increased damage over time to enemies that are moving, which a lot of enemies tend to be moving, right? Or affected by a Vampiric curse, which is another effect from the Vampiric powers that is fairly easy to apply from something like this effect and some other like curse effects as well. So this should be an interesting build, a Rabies build to check out as well. Although whether it can match up to the other aforementioned ones and some established builds like Tornado remains to be seen. Oh, and for yet even more dot damage support, there's also a new unique called the Val's Corrosive Signet, which on a lucky hit allows damage over time effects a chance to erupt, dealing damage to nearby enemies, which is kind of like the Barber effect from Season 1, but for DOTs, or damage over time effects. Now there is a pretty big nerf coming to a specific legendary aspect, being the aspect of Rampaging Werebeast, Whereas previously, whenever you transformed into a dire werebear or werewolf, it allowed you to continually stack your critical strike damage all the way up to, I think, 990%. And this is especially, or was especially powerful whenever critical strike damage had its own damage bucket, right? And so now with not only critical strike damage sort of being nerfed in terms of the damage calculations, but also the cap becoming 200%, this will make this aspect a lot weaker compared to before, but let's be honest, this is definitely warranted for a nerf. So this will definitely just bring it more in line with some of the other aspects and builds, right? Which I think is an overall good change. Not to mention, some of the damage that has been lost by builds that were using this aspect and can still use this aspect, for example, the Werewolf Tornado or even Werewolf Lightning Storm, and also Pulverize Werebear Druid builds can compensate or be compensated for with some of the other changes, sort of spreading out their power across other sources, right? For example, with the Werewolf Tornado build, the Thunderstruck Paragon glyph now instead allows you to gain multiplicative damage based on your total amount of the damage to close and damage to distant bonuses. So there's actually a pretty big buff from this, because especially since you can get both affixes on one single item, right? So this should offset a lot of the damage, I guess, reduction from this, and also the critical strike damage nerfs in general. For the storm builds and things like Werewolf Tornado, of course, and Werewolf Lightning Storm. On the other hand, for Overpower Werebear Druids, the Earthen Devastation glyph has also been buffed, providing you extra critical strike damage multiplicatively based on your bonus damage to crowd control. So that would be really good, on top of all the aforementioned Overpower buffs and changes that I talked about. Now, when it comes to the most efficient way to progress at the beginning of the season, you'll want to focus on the season journey objectives to be able to earn not only material rewards, but also certain aspects that'll be featured in that season and not available or unlockable through dungeons. However, one major difference between Season 2 and Season 1 so far is that in Season 1 we actually got an early preview of the season journey with its objectives and rewards, including of course the legendary aspects, which would shape the exact builds that people would tend to go for at the beginning of the season, or rather the best builds for that, right? But in Season 2, we did not get such a preview, except for perhaps what you can see here, which may or may not be very accurate. But anyhow, with Season 2's season journey objectives, and more notably, legendary aspects being somewhat of an unknown, it's a bit more difficult to determine the absolute best builds that one can go for at the start. Now, for sort of a clue that we have for the specific legendary aspects that will be added in Season 2's journey, if Season 1 was any indication, Blizzard added all the new legendary aspects that were implemented in the season into the journey as well. So if we follow that same pattern, in Season 2 we should see the Raw Might aspect, which would be a strong aspect for, again, the Pulverized Druid and perhaps some other Werebear builds too. Another clue is that the aspects that were in the season journey in Season 1 have probably rotated out for Season 2, and that happens to include the Shockwave aspect, which is actually a crucial aspect for Pulverized Druids to essentially hit the entire room and deal even more damage with their Pulverizes. So with that not being a guaranteed drop, so to speak, you'll have to get it from an item or gambling. That could sort of hinder our leveling process compared to Season 1's. However, with the Raw Might aspect, that could probably make up a little bit of that lost power from not having the Shockwave aspect in the beginning of Season 2 if you're going to be playing with Pulverize. And another aspect that was in Season 1's journey was the Subterranean aspect, which is also good for builds like Trampleslide, but that will not be as big of a difference maker compared to the Shockwave aspect if you're going to be playing Pulverize. Now, even though in Season 2 Renown will not have to be refarmed if you've done it before, in whether it be the non-season or Season 1, you will have to refarm your dungeon aspects, and especially target the aspects that will be useful for your, say, endgame build that you'll be going for, or whatever you'll be progressing with, right? And so some good aspects to pick up along the way as you level up from dungeons are the Ursine Horror aspect from the Belfry Zakara in Hawazar. This is crucial for Pulverize because it converts your Pulverize skill into an Earth skill, allowing you to benefit from all the Earth modifiers. Another one is the Umbral aspect from Champion's Demise rather. This is great for resource generation for pretty much any build. Some other ones include the Disobedience aspect, which is great for armor, although it doesn't benefit your non-physical resistances anymore, but it's actually going to be helping you with physical resistances very much. So that's from the Halls of the Damned. Another one is Mending Stone, which will be really helpful for a lot of builds if you run Earthen Bulwark, which will generally be used in most leveling builds, and this is from the Sealed Archives. Some other decent ones include the Retaliation aspect, which will increase your damage while fortified from the Seaside Descent, the Quicksand aspect for Pulverize though, from Thurl's Den. There's also the Ballistic aspect, which gives you +2 Earth skills from Whispering Pines. And then if you're going to be running with an Earth build like Landslide build or Lightning Storm, or a hybrid with Lightning Storm and Landslide, you can go for a Crash Stone aspect from the Stockades. You can get Overcharge aspect for Lightning Storm from Mariner's Refuge. And then you can also get the Wind Striker aspect from Shift the Ruins, which will increase your movement speed. And as for Vampiric powers, which by the way you want to start collecting and progressing even while leveling up at the start of Season 2. But if we just take a look at them, starting with the major Vampiric powers, which are generally the most powerful ones, with each requiring 6 packs, and I believe you can equip up to 25 packs, but you need like specific combinations of each of the 3 types on your gear, and you can also craft the specific packs on your gear eventually later on anyway. But anyhow, you can equip up to 5 Vampiric powers, some cost less, some cost more. But if we just look at some of the most notable ones for a few top-end or high-end Druid builds, first of all, I really want to highlight the, let's see, Blood Boil here, which is whenever your core skills overpower. So this is another overpower synergy. And earlier I mentioned this, but every 20 seconds your next skill is also guaranteed to overpower with some more AoE potential, right? And then there's also Bathe in Blood. This actually synergizes with Lightning Storm because it is basically a direct buff to a channeling skill, a huge buff at that, giving you 40% increased damage and some defense as well. Some other ones, I don't really think this Curse one, Vampiric Curse, is going to be that good. This Call Familiar is probably not going to be that helpful because you're not going to be focusing into like a pet build or anything, unlikely. And another one is this one I think is interesting, which is that when you evade, you turn into bats, becoming unstoppable. This in particular synergizes with a specific new unique pants, which is Tybalt's Will, which by the way draws from Duriel, and whenever you become unstoppable, it allows you to gain some damage multiplicatively and also gain primary resource, which can be very valuable as well. So anyhow, coming back to Vampiric powers, the last one here, Moonrise, might be good for something like a Crone Lightning Claw type of build with the Great Staff of the Crone with like you double basic attacks and Storm Strike and stuff, but that sort of remains to be seen. But anyhow, looking at some of the other ones above, some of the minor Vampiric powers, first one, Anticipation, should be pretty decent, especially if you're running with Tempest Roar eventually, which by the way drops from Duriel as well. And you can, with this, have more uptime on your Grizzly Rage, right? Or like your Dire Wolf if you're using that instead. And for some other ones, a lot of these are just like straight up damage increases to various things, sort of like a minor legendary affix. This one I think might have some potential with gaining primary resource and might incentivize you to spec into say Poison Creeper and a little bit of Wolves just to have a chance to restore some primary resource, but I think more testing has to be done for this. And then for Hectic, this would probably be good for something like Crone, Lightning Claw or something like that. Whenever you're attacking with your Claw and your Storm Strike, you can reduce some other cooldowns too. So there could be some synergy there. And for some other ones, there's nothing too crazy. I think this Rampart here gives you a barrier of 40% of your maximum life is pretty high. This also synergizes really well with Lightning Storm because it basically generates you a barrier when you're not moving. Another one is Resilience is probably going to be pretty commonly used as just your straight up damage reduction Vampiric power, which could also potentially free up a legendary aspect or something for something more offensive like a unique item. And I think the rest of these are pretty much just like sort of minor powers, but you can check them out and really just mix and match and frequently replace, you know, your different Vampiric powers with what you might need at the moment. And just one more thing I want to quickly touch on, and it's that the Season of Blood will introduce a series of mid to end game bosses for you to target farm uniques, right? And as you can see here, very notably, the Echoes of Varshad as well as Grigor the Galvanic Saint will actually become available for you to farm as early as World Tier 3 from say level 50ish, right? So with that, let's look at the loot tables of each. So if we look at the Druid specific items, you have the Mad Wolf's Cleave, which could be somewhat helpful for like a poison build or something, but there's also Vasily's Prayer. If you're going to be playing something like Pulverize, it'll be pretty good. And also Great Staff of the Crown, which is actually a key item if you're going to be rolling with something like Trampleslide, or if you want to play some kind of basic attack Claw and Stormstrike build. And some of these other items here, the non-class specific uniques, include the Mother's Embrace, which could be pretty helpful for Pulverize too. And if we move down, at the other boss, the Grigor or Grigor the Galvanic Saint, his items don't feel as useful so far. Maybe we can find some use for some of these if people discover and test out them and find out they're actually really good, but I wouldn't really prioritize this boss just yet. And that was pretty much all I want to cover regarding all the Druid changes and some of the ways that you can more efficiently progress and the types of builds that you can go for and so forth. With that, I will be putting out some more videos with specific builds for Season 2, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will also be coming out with actual builds that will be linked with those videos. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in Sanctuary. Peace.